Welcome to Headliners Forum. We're here to bring you the best in Texas journalism, the stories behind the great stories. I'm Mark Morrison. Our special guest is Michael A. Smith, editor of the Galveston County Daily News, who won the Headliners Foundation Green Award for opinion writing, competing against print media of all sizes based in Texas. Michael's editorial columns run prominently under the heading Our View. He does not shy away from the most controversial issues facing his community and brings thoughtful, nuanced analysis to subjects that often get wrapped up in emotional and sometimes bitter discussion in these polarized times. Michael, congratulations on your award and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me here. I'm very glad to be here and very proud to be among the Green Award winners. I look back through some of the past winners, and there's some very good Texas journalists in there. So I'm kind of giddy about being among them.
Right. We're eager to talk about some of your outstanding work, but please start with a little background on Michael Smith and how you approach your opinion pieces.
Well, I kind of fell into journalism by accident. I had a career, sort of a short career in the Army, but I planned to make a much longer one. But I got out and I wanted to get a college education, and I started looking for something that seemed like it would be not boring, exciting and interesting. And I stumbled into newspapering, and once you walk off into that swamp, it's hard to get out of. So I've been at it ever since. And I came from a family of newspaper readers and readers. My father was, he read 3 newspapers every day and complained about all 3 of them. And just like, your typical kind of old school newspaper reader. I grew up in a house full of books, and my father had kind of frustrated ambitions to be a writer, and he had great respect for writers. And our house was full of books by good writers. And so I was I grew up with a kind of a respect and admiration for anybody that could write a good sentence. And so after I got into it, I just sort of fell in love with it, and I've been at it ever since. As far as, how do I approach my columns, I've always thought that good opinion writing generally follows good reporting, just like any other kind of good journalistic writing does. I rely a lot on my reporting staff, which is very good for a newspaper of our size, to kind of provide the basic material to build the opinion pieces out of. Although I can and do some of my own original reporting. I started here at the Daily News a little more than 20 years ago as a City Hall reporter. I've been the city editor here. I've been an investigative reporter here. I was the associate editor for a while, the managing editor. And I've written a lot of editorials over the years. I mean, the Daily News kind of has a reputation for strong editorial pages, and we have kind of a bare-knuckled opinion section. People get in there and mix it up, and we have a pretty light hand on the editing, so you never know what you might read on the Daily News's opinion pages, and it infuriates people of all stripes pretty often, but that's a good thing. I think it keeps people entertained and informed and excited about the newspaper. And I look for topics that move me. If I can't get a little bit riled up about a topic, I have a hard time writing about it. But the ones that really get under my skin, I think I have an easier time. And, the Daily News has a tradition of signed editorials, which is kind of unusual, I think, in the industry, but it goes way back to at least the 1800s. And I think it gives our editorial writers a little bit of room to have we have kind of an institutional voice, and we definitely have an agreed upon stance in our editorials, but signing the editorials as individuals gives us a little bit of freedom to have our own voice. Each one of our editorial writers has a different voice, and I think that adds to, and our editorials wind up being kind of like little columns or essays. So anyway, the approach to it's, I think among the kind of the stable of our editorial writers, there's 4 or 5 of us that write them in the week. We pick the topics that kind of wind our watches and get us going.
Yeah, one of those issues, Galveston, the Galveston area faces many of the same challenges that other communities around the state and country do. One of those is the backlash from bad police practices in some departments and the publicity over those. How has Galveston area been affected by this, and what was your argument in the column that you called "We shouldn't defund, but we can demilitarize our police"?
Right. The protests over the Floyd killing did make it here to Galveston County. We had Black Lives Matter protests, and the controversy kind of roiled the community here a little bit too. Although I think that one of the themes in all of that is that the relationship maybe between the police and the communities in most of the cities around here was a little better than maybe it is in some other places. The point of my editorial about defunding the police, though, is that to me that was a little bit off the mark. I mean, to me the real problem that I see in kind of modern U.S. policing isn't so much it's the militarization of it. I think that over 20 or 30 years, peace officers have evolved into something, many times evolved into something that's not really a peacekeeper, a keeper of the peace, but more of almost a paramilitary operative. The specific point was that a lot of the federal funding for police departments years ago used to be for things like overtime and for community policing programs. And I think because of the war on drugs, but also even more so since 9/11, that paradigm has changed, and most of the funding in the kind of the financial support goes to buying hardware and military hardware. I mentioned in my editorial grenade launchers and bayonets and combat knives and all this kind of tactical equipment and even vehicles. That's not really the kind of the menu of things that you would expect for a peacekeeper to have, but things that you would expect a war fighter to have. And I think if you're attracting and training and equipping people with kind of a combat soldier mentality, then what you're going to wind up with in your communities is combat. And maybe we need to think about shifting that money. And one of the arguments about not being able to reform policing in this country is the old standby. Well, that'd be great to do, but there's not any money to do that with. And the fact is there's a ton of money to do that with. We're just spending it on, armored cars and assault rifles now. But if we spend it on mental health services and, drug addiction treatment programs and things like that, we might see a good outcome.
Right. A very unconventional look at the issue, and suggest some unconventional approaches to solving some of the problem as well. A related law enforcement question anyway, you wrote about how Texas, the state, had changed its marijuana laws and really thrown your local law enforcement into in some chaos in terms of deciding, well, how do you enforce this new law?
Yeah, the problem there, I believe, was that, the Texas legislature faced a dilemma in that, most of the legislature is probably dedicated anti-drug warriors. But then on the other hand, you've got this growing industry of kind of hemp-related products, CBD oil or CBD oil, whichever one it is, and all these kind of products. That's a growing industry with money to spend on lobbying and things like that. And so you've got legal hemp and illegal marijuana, and the Texas legislature tried to come up with a way to distinguish those two. And I believe the calculation is anything with more than 0.3% THC in it is illegal. Anything with less than that is legal. And that law was all well and good, except that labs in the state of Texas didn't have the ability to test evidence to that level of accuracy. And so for a while there in 2020, it was impossible for prosecutors in the state of Texas to determine whether something was legal hemp products and CBD oil and things like that, or whether it was legal marijuana, which was all kind of funny, I thought. What wasn't funny about it was that the response to this problem by our local district attorney was that they were going to shelve all these kind of nickel and dime marijuana cases. They were just going to put them in kind of a judicial limbo. They weren't going to dismiss them or prosecute them. They couldn't prosecute them because they couldn't prove that the evidence was actually illegal. They weren't going to dismiss them. They were just going to kind of leave people in this judicial limbo until they finally got around to having the ability to determine whether this person might have broken the law or not. And then they weren't going to try to prosecute all of those backlog cases, but instead they were going to let each individual police department decide which of the cases would go forward for prosecution. And that's just, there are just so many problems with that approach. It's hard to know where to start. For one thing, people have a right to a speedy trial. And if the state is going to presume to prosecute somebody, they need to be ready to do it in a speedy way. And it's just not, I think, constitutional, and it's certainly not morally and ethically just to tell people, well, just hang around until we get ready to decide whether we've got the stuff to prosecute you with or not. And I certainly don't believe that you can let the same people that decided to make the arrest in the first place decide which of the cases are going to go forward for prosecution. That's why we have district attorneys' offices and prosecutors in the first place, so the police don't get to make that choice. And that raises all kinds of potential problems. I mean, who's to say that, most of the cases that ultimately get prosecuted aren't going to be Black people or Hispanic people or Asian people or people who don't happen to be related to somebody on the city council. I mean, you can just slice that in a million different ways and they're all wrong. The only thing that the district attorney's office could credibly do was either dismiss all the cases and, start over with a new batch of nickel and dime drug arrests later on, or vow to prosecute them all. But anything in between there was just, wrong.
Yeah. You also wrote about a statute honoring Confederate soldiers called dignified resignation that some local citizens have been pushing to remove since 2015. Describe that statute to us and the issue and your take on it.
Well, it's a statue of a Confederate. I think it's actually a sailor, but a Confederate person in the Confederate military, and they've got a broken sword, and there's a destroyed cannon, and you know the statue is a kind of a symbol acknowledging defeat. It's not a kind of a glorious victory sort of monument like you might see it. It's but the real problem with it was, that's the provenance. The reason it's there in the first place is a problem. The real problem was a plaque on there that talked about the purity of the motives of the Confederate cause and all kinds of things like that. So this obviously came up when the whole issue of Confederate statues got hot a few months ago, and that's a complex argument. I mean, and I'm not in the camp that says, put a chain on them all and pull them down and drag them off and throw them into the sea, but I think it was obvious that the real problem with this one is it's on the lawn of one of the county courthouse facilities, the place that used to be the one main courthouse in Galveston. In Galveston County, a lot of the actual courtrooms are now in a new building, but the tax assessor collector's office and the county clerk's office and the county treasurer's office and the commissioner's court, all these departments of this essential government operation are housed in that building. And to me, there's just no argument that you cannot have a monument that might be offensive or threatening or hurtful or intimidating to a certain group of people on the lawn of a place where people have to go to pay their taxes, to register their cars, to register to vote, to cast a ballot for voting. So while it might be a little more complicated when you talk about university campuses or parks or things like that, it's an absolute no-brainer that statue shouldn't be on the grounds of the courthouse. It needs to come down. And it needs to come down for the same reason that you don't put nativity scenes in the county courthouse, and you don't have the 10 Commandments in a courtroom, and you don't have a giant cross or a giant Star of David or any other kind of sectarian religious symbol in a secular place where people go and do their business that they're sometimes mandated to do. I mean, if you have to go to the courthouse, you have to go to the courthouse. It's not like you have an option. So to me, it was just kind of a straight up issue. No matter what else you do with all the other statues everywhere else, the ones that are on public property at places where people have to go and do their government business, they need to go. They need to come down.
And has your observations about this helped the local powers that be come to any kind of resolution on this particular issue?
Well, they very quietly went and took the plaque off of it. I can't claim credit for that, but the plaque was the most offensive thing about it to a lot of people, because like I said, it's not a heroic statue.
Right.
It's a picture of somebody who has lost. It's a statue of somebody that's lost, but people were really offended by the sentiment of that plaque, and rightly so. I mean, that plaque was false, and that was very quietly removed from the statue. I don't claim credit for that. The statue's still there, but the plaque is gone. And the issue has kind of died down locally. It comes up sort of periodically. There are people in the community that don't forget, and every now and then they'll send a column in, or they'll bring it up or circulate a petition. And I think eventually that statue will come down, and there may be even a plan underway now. It might just be a matter of finding a new place for it. And I also pointed out in that column, that this is a legitimately painful topic for a lot of Southern white people, especially Southern white people kind of my age and older, who grew up on this notion of the glorious lost cause of the Confederacy. And, for people who grew up thinking that Lee and Longstreet and Jackson were heroes, and you learn that in childhood, and the same way you learn racism in childhood. And so, I think you have to give people on both sides of this issue a little room to breathe on it, or you just get people digging in and we get another one of those kind of civil wars.
Right. One of those issues that's going to continue to be discussed and probably resolved in a more major way in the future.
Yeah, I don't think it's over by any stretch of the imagination. The hot part of it might be over. And I think you're going to see more and more monuments to the Confederacy kind of quietly go away, whether they're gone off to some place where they can't be viewed, or put someplace where they can be put into kind of a truthful historical context.
Well, Michael, we're delighted to honor journalists in small and medium-sized markets who distinguish themselves among larger media around the state. Our judges agreed with your publisher's assessment. Readers can't help but admire the perfect turns of phrase and the clarity with which Smith gets his points across. He takes on thorny issues with precision, style, and even some humor, and never presents readers with tepid opinions piled on top of a bunch of background. Well done, Michael.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. And I appreciate the foundation taking the time to honor and recognize good journalism among all the papers in Texas. And I tell you, having kind of looked around and been around a little bit, we're very lucky in Texas to have as many good newspapers and good journalists as we have. And I appreciate the foundation's work in highlighting those hardworking colleagues of mine.
Well, thank you very much. And we appreciate your helping us understand how you produce this outstanding work. You can link to some of Michael Smith's best columns and to interviews with other award-winning Texas journalists on our site, headlinersfoundation.org. For Gary Pickle, producer of Headliners Forum, I'm Mark Morrison.